So we're starting a new unit where we're analyzing data. And we're looking at notes 12.2 here, and we're looking at frequency and histograms. So how do I make and interpret frequency tables and then create the histogram? So let's go ahead and start with frequency. And I know I have all this written down. Feel free to pause. Make sure you get it all written down. So the frequency is the number of data values in that interval. Okay, and we'll talk about the intervals. For example, if I was even going to say the number of students that are 14 years old, if there was 5 people in our class that were 14 years old, then we would have 5 in that category. Frequency table is actually, we create a table and we group the data. So let's just jump right in and talk about making a frequency table and looking at the actual frequency, okay? How many fall in each category. So how you want to identify this probably is you want to start by looking at your smallest number. So the smallest number that I see here would be my 2, okay? And then my largest number that I see here would be a 17. So from 2 to 17, we're going to take and we're going to break our frequency table into different intervals. And they need to be even intervals. So let's go ahead and talk about what's going to happen here with the table. You're going to want to write these down. First of all, the table, it will not overlap. Okay, so no overlapping. Okay, no overlap. No gaps. I'll show you what I mean by this here in just a second. And are usually equal size. And the very last thing I want to make sure that we add here is we want between 3 and 5 intervals. I know I got a little sloppy there. I apologize for that. So if we're going to create our frequency table here, I'll change colors for us. Okay. We're going to start with looking at our first interval here. And we're going to start with 0. And I would say we would maybe want to go like 0 to 4. If you actually count on your fingers, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, that's actually 5 spaces. The next one, if we go 5 more spaces, okay, then it's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That would be our next interval. Then we would go 10 to 14, that would be 5 more. So these are equal in size, okay? And then we would go 15 to 19. Remember, we want to make 3 to 5. I made 4. Okay. Now, your book actually made some. This is example 1 on page 732, and they did it differently. Okay. So again, it's based on if you follow these rules where you have 3 to 5 intervals, there's no overlapping. So you'll notice the number 4 is not in 2 different spots. No gaps. We couldn't skip a number. I couldn't go 0 to 4 and then like 6 to 10. We got to make sure we don't skip any numbers. Then you're good to go on creating these intervals. Okay, yours might look different than someone else in the class, and as long as you followed all those correctly, it would be correct. So now let's actually look at the frequency. So this is the part where we're literally just taking hash marks. And how I would go about this is I would go left to right looking at those numbers. Where does the number 7 fall? It falls right here. I'm going to just do a hash mark. There's one number so far that falls in that category. 17, 14, 2, and we keep going all the way to the end. And so if you look at where I left off here, we would count and see how many fall in the category 0 to 4. Well, that's 3. How many in 5 to 9? That is 5 fall in that category. 5 of these numbers fall in that interval. 10 to 14, there's 4. And 15 to 19, we have 2. So the first thing we have to be able to do is we have to be able to create the frequency table. Okay, so these were home runs at a home run derby contest. These were what every person got, and we made a little frequency table out of it. So we can take this and we can turn it into a histogram. I want you to think of a histogram, it's very similar to a bar graph, okay? The difference with a histogram is that we're actually displaying data, numerical data in this. And so let's go ahead, and I want you to kind of picture this table right here. And if you were to turn it to the left, sideways, that's about how it's going to look. Let's see if you can visualize that. To my graph, there were 3. The next one had 4, which was 10. The frequency table. Once we create the frequency table, we are good to go with making our histogram. That's it. And making our actual histogram. So we're going to make a graph here. Okay. And I know that if I go back and look at my bars, I think the biggest number I had was 5. So we could have, this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is a little harder writing on this iPad, so I apologize. Okay. And then along the bottom, we have the actual intervals. So the first interval that we had was 0 to 4. So if we look at how many from 0 to 4, so we go up to the number 3. Oops, sorry, and we can shade that in. Okay, that's how many numbers fell in that category. And then we go to the next one, which was 5 to 9, and I know there was 5 in this one. And what I want to make sure is very clear, they said no gaps. So you notice that this bar is right next to the other one. I want you to think about what would create a gap. I'll come back to that at the end. 14, I'll use a different color here. And it went up 4, so we go up. Again, these are touching. And last but not least was 2. And that was our category of 15 to 19. So this is a histogram that represents the data that we just collected with the intervals, or the frequency table. Okay. Now I asked the question about when would there be a gap, because we talk about no gaps. There would be a gap. Let's just pretend. Let's say that there's not a number that falls between 10 and 14. If there's no number, you would leave a gap there to represent 0. Okay, so we only have a gap if we're representing a 0. Otherwise, those bars touch. The very first thing we want to talk about for a minute, and this is in your book on page 733. And there are different kinds of histograms that we can see. If we see something that's pretty uniform, okay, roughly the same height, okay, symmetric, okay, kind of meaning that you could divide the histogram in half and it's symmetrical. We fold it in half, it's a mirror image of itself. And then we can also have one that is skewed. Maybe the peak is not in the center. Okay, so this is something to keep in mind when they talk about naming them. So you might want to make sure you get those jotted down. Otherwise, I just went over one example of how we create